Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something that'll make you grateful for air conditioning and weather apps. You've survived a pandemic, lockdowns, toilet paper shortages, economic crashes, maybe even a really bad Tinder date. But let's pretend it's April 14th, 1935, and you're about to experience the single worst day in American agricultural history. The day the sky literally fell. The day darkness swallowed the sun at noon. The day that gave us the term Dust Bowl, because one reporter couldn't think of a better way to describe hell on Earth. So before we dive into this suffocating nightmare, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you want to hear more stories about how nature tried to delete humanity from the Great Plains. I'm not going to chase you through a dust storm about it. And hey, drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments. I love knowing who else is lying awake at 2 a.m, wondering if their grandparents' survival stories were exaggerated. Spoiler, they weren't. Now, dim the lights, maybe open a window for that fresh air you're about to really appreciate, and let's ease into the day that turned noon into midnight. You wake up in the Oklahoma Panhandle. Your bed is a thin mattress stuffed with straw that pokes through the fabric like tiny accusatory fingers, reminding you that comfort died sometime around 1931. The air coming through the gaps in your wooden walls is surprisingly warm for mid-April, almost 80 degrees, and there's something unsettling about that warmth. It feels like nature holding its breath before screaming. Your pillow, if you can call it that, is basically a sack of sadness and yesterday's dust. You've gotten used to waking up with grit in your teeth, in your hair, coating your eyelashes like the world's worst mascara. That's just life in the Dust Bowl. The decade-long environmental disaster that's turned the Great Plains into something between a desert and a punishment from an angry god who apparently majored in atmospheric science. You sit up and your back cracks in 3 places. You're not old, maybe 30, but your body feels like it's been through a war. Which in a sense, it has. The war against drought, against failed crops, against dust storms that roll through like freight trains made of dirt. You've seen 14 dust storms just this month alone. 14 times you've watched the sky turn brown and had to stuff wet rags under the doors while your children coughed in the corner. But this morning is different. You step outside and the sky is blue. Actually blue. Not the sickly yellow-brown you've grown accustomed to, but that crisp, clear blue you remember from before everything went wrong. The kind of blue that makes you think maybe, just maybe, things are turning around. Here's a historical fact you need to know. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a drought, it was a perfect storm of human stupidity and natural disaster. Between 1909 and 1929, farmers ploughed up 32 million acres of protective grassland. Those native grasses, buffalo grass and blue grama, had root systems 5 to 6 feet deep that held the soil together like nature's own rebar. Remove them, and you've basically created a giant sandbox waiting for the wind to play in it. And the wind? Oh, the wind has been playing. By 1935, dust storms have increased from 14 in 1932 to 38 this year alone. You're living through what will later be called one of the worst environmental disasters in American history, though right now you just call it Tuesday. You walk toward your chicken coop, such as it is. 3 chickens remain from the dozen you started with. The others either died from inhaling too much dust or got eaten by coyotes who've become bold in their own desperation. Your rooster, a scraggly thing you've named Persistence because he refuses to die, despite every logical reason he should, crows at the sun like he's personally offended by its cheerfulness. The temperature is climbing fast. By mid-morning it'll hit 84 degrees in nearby Dodge City. People are outside, actually outside, doing things they haven't been able to do in weeks. Your neighbour is repairing his fence. A couple down the road is working in their garden, probably planting things that won't grow, but trying anyway because hope is cheaper than giving up. You can hear church bells in the distance, calling people to Sunday service. You might not realise it yet, but you're living in the eye of the storm, not metaphorically, literally. A massive cold front is racing down from Canada at 50 to 60 miles per hour, carrying with it millions of tons of topsoil that's about to turn day into night. But right now, at 10 a.m, you don't know that. Right now, you're just enjoying the sun on your face like it's the first good thing that's happened since the Depression started. Spoiler alert, it's a trap. You decide to walk into town. It's only 3 miles, and after weeks of being cooped up during dust storms, your legs are itching for movement. The dirt road crunches under your boots, that familiar sound of dried earth that used to be fertile farmland. You pass fields that should be green with wheat, but instead look like the surface of the moon, all craters and desolation. A historical fact worth noting. Just a month earlier, in March 1935, another massive dust storm destroyed 5 million acres of wheat. 5 million acres! That's roughly the size of New Jersey, just gone, buried under drifting sand dunes that piled up against houses and barns like snow that never melts. You reach town around noon, Stratford, Texas, or maybe it's Boise City, Oklahoma. The towns all blur together now, united by their shared misery and empty storefronts. But today there's activity. People are out, children are playing. One kid has tied a rope to a chicken and is trying to walk it like a dog, which is equal parts sad and hilarious. Welcome to Depression-era entertainment. You stop by the general store, where Mr. Peterson is sweeping dust off his porch for what must be the 1,000th time this month. It's like Sisyphus, but with a broom and more regret. "Beautiful day," he says, and you nod, because what else can you say? Beautiful is relative when your baseline is "can I see my hand in front of my face?" You buy a tin of coffee with coins you've been saving, coins that feel heavy with guilt because maybe you should spend them on something more practical. But practical hasn't kept you sane, and coffee, real coffee, is a tiny rebellion against the universe trying to bury you alive. The barometric pressure is dropping rapidly, but you don't know that. Radio warnings have been issued about falling pressure, but you're accustomed to such reports. It's like weather app notifications. You ignore them until it's too late and you're caught in a thunderstorm wearing white pants. Around 2 p.m, you start heading home. The warmth is making you drowsy, that pleasant Sunday afternoon feeling where time moves slow as honey. You pass a family having a picnic, actually sitting on a blanket eating sandwiches like they're in a painting of how life used to be. A man tips his hat to you. Birds are flying. Lots of them. Geese and ducks heading south with unusual urgency, but you don't think much of it. You should. It's around 3:30 p.m. when you first notice something wrong. The birds have gone quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of evening settling in, but the wrong kind of quiet. The kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up like tiny antennas, picking up a signal your brain hasn't processed yet. You're about a mile from home when you see it. Or rather, you see the people reacting to it before you see it itself. A woman grabs her child and runs toward her house. A man on a wagon whips his horses into a panicked gallop. You turn around to look north and your breath catches in your throat like you've swallowed something solid. There's a wall, not a building, not a mountain. A wall of blackness rolling across the prairie toward you. It's massive, over 2 miles high, stretching from horizon to horizon like someone draped a curtain of darkness across the sky. It looks like the end of the world. It looks like every nightmare you've ever had about suffocation made physical. It looks like God said, "You know what, I'm done," and just pulled down a shade. Here's your fringe fact for the night. Some witnesses described it as looking like a land-based tsunami, or a mountain of blackness. One farmer said it looked like the Red Sea closing in on the children of Israel, which is both biblical and terrifying, the perfect combination for 1935 Oklahoma. The wall is moving at roughly 60 miles per hour. You have maybe 10 minutes before it hits. 10 minutes to cover a mile. Your legs start moving before your brain fully catches up. You're running now, running toward your house where your wife and 2 children are probably still enjoying the sunshine, completely unaware that darkness is racing toward them at highway speeds. Your lungs burn. Your feet slip in the loose dirt. You can hear it now, a low roar like a freight train mixed with thunder, and underneath that the whisper of millions of particles of earth being scraped off the ground and hurled into the atmosphere. Static electricity is building so intensely that the air itself feels charged, crackling against your skin like tiny, angry insects. The temperature is dropping fast. That pleasant 80-degree warmth is plummeting as the cold front from Canada slams into the heated air. In Dodge City, the temperature will drop from 84 degrees to the 50s in less than 2 hours. In Guymon, Oklahoma, it'll fall over 50 degrees. Your body can feel the change, that sudden cold that cuts through your shirt like you're suddenly standing in front of an open freezer. You're maybe a quarter mile from home when the leading edge hits. The wind arrives first, a sudden blast that knocks you sideways. It's not gradual, not a building breeze. It's instant 0 to 60 mph in seconds, like someone turned on a cosmic wind turbine aimed directly at your face. Then comes the dust. It hits you like a physical wall, like running into a sheet of sandpaper travelling at the highway speeds. Your eyes slam shut reflexively. Your mouth fills with dirt. You try to breathe and inhale what feels like a shovelful of fine sand. You're choking, gagging, your hands instinctively covering your face as you stumble forward, blind, disoriented, your sense of up and down disappearing into the absolute darkness, and it is absolute, total, complete. You open your eyes, or at least you think you do, it's hard to tell, and you see nothing. Not dim shapes, not shadows, nothing. It's darker than any night you've ever experienced because there's no moon, no stars, no distant lights. There's just blackness, thick and suffocating and alive with the roar of wind and the sting of a billion particles of Oklahoma farmland pelting your skin. You can't see your own hand in front of your face, can't see the ground beneath your feet, can't see the house that should be right in front of you. You drop to your hands and knees because standing feels impossible in the wind, and you start crawling. Your fingers dig into the dirt. No, wait, is this dirt or road? You can't tell. Everything feels the same. Everything is dust. You might not realise it yet, but you're breathing in approximately 0.0368 grams of dust per cubic foot. Over the course of this storm, which will last for hours, you'll inhale roughly 6.6 grams of fine particulate matter. That's like eating a spoonful of dirt, except it's going into your lungs, coating the delicate tissues, filling the tiny alveoli where oxygen is supposed to transfer into your bloodstream. You're crawling, but toward what? You've lost all sense of direction. The wind is howling from multiple directions as it swirls and eddies. You could be heading toward your house or toward the open prairie or in circles for all you know. Panic starts creeping in, that cold finger of terror running down your spine whispering you're going to die out here, 30 feet from safety, because you can't see. Then your hand hits wood, a fence post. You nearly weep with relief. You feel along the fence splinters digging into your palm and follow it. Please be the right fence. Please lead to the house. Please. The static electricity is so intense that blue flames are crackling between fence posts. You can see them. Tiny sparks in the absolute darkness, like the world's most terrifying nightlight. The electrical charge is strong enough to short out car engines. Birds and small animals are being stunned by it, falling from the sky or just dropping dead in the fields. Your hand finds a corner post. You remember this corner. You turn. 20 more feet. 15. 10. Your other hand hits siding. The house. You made it. You feel along the wall, find the door, yank it open and stumble inside, slamming it behind you. The darkness follows you in. Inside isn't much better than outside. The dust has found every crack, every gap, every microscopic space in your walls. It's pouring in like water through the gaps in a sinking ship. Your wife has stuffed wet towels and rags under the doors and around the windows, but it doesn't matter. Dust fills the air inside your home, settling on every surface, turning the air itself brown. Your 2 children are huddled in the corner, cloths tied around their faces, eyes wide with terror above the makeshift masks. They're 7 and 9, old enough to be scared, young enough to think their parents can protect them from anything. You wish that were true. Is it the end? Your daughter asks, her voice muffled by the cloth. You don't know how to answer that. Outside, through the walls that are creaking and groaning in the wind, you can hear the roar of the storm. It sounds like the earth is being torn apart. It sounds like every dust storm you've ever experienced multiplied by 1,000. It sounds like God clearing his throat. Here's what's happening outside right now. Information you won't fully understand until days later, when survivors start comparing notes. This storm is affecting an area 800 miles long, and 300 to 500 miles wide, from central Nebraska to the Mexican border. It's displaced an estimated 300,000 tons of topsoil from the prairie on this day alone. That's in addition to the 350 million tons that blew away in the May 1934 storm and the 850 million tons total for 1935. That's not dirt. That's the future. That's the crops that won't grow next year. That's the fertility of the land being scraped away and scattered across the continent. The darkness is absolute. You try to light a kerosene lamp, but it won't stay lit. The air is too thick with dust. There's not enough oxygen to sustain the flame. You try again and manage to get a weak flicker, barely enough light to see faces by, but it's something. In that dim, dying light, you can see the dust falling like snow, settling on the table, on the floor, on your children's hair. Your son starts coughing, deep, rattling coughs that shake his small frame. Your wife pulls him closer, covering his mouth with another cloth, but the coughing continues. That sound will haunt you for months. That wet, painful sound of lungs trying to expel particles that are too fine to be coughed up. Particles that are penetrating deep into lung tissue where they'll cause inflammation and infection. Dust pneumonia, that's what they call it. Symptoms include high fever, chest pains, difficulty breathing, and too often, death. In Kansas alone, 17 people will die from dust pneumonia just from this storm. 3 more will die from dust suffocation. And those are just the ones recorded. In rural areas like yours, where doctors are scarce and record-keeping is spotty, who knows how many more will die quietly in their homes, their deaths attributed to natural causes or just forgotten in the chaos. The storm rages for what feels like hours. The absolute darkness lasts about 40 minutes, though it feels like an eternity. Then it lightens slightly to a dark brown twilight that's barely better. You can see shapes now. Vague outlines of furniture, the huddled forms of your family. 3 more hours pass like this in perpetual dusk, the wind still howling, the dust still falling. You think about the chickens. They're dead. You know it. No way they survive this. Persistence the rooster. Gone. Your small garden. Buried. The fence you were planning to fix probably torn down and scattered across 3 counties. Everything you own that isn't inside this house is either destroyed or buried. And even what's inside is coated in a layer of dust so fine it feels like flour. Around 7 p.m, the wind finally starts to die down. The darkness lifts gradually, grudgingly, like a curtain being slowly raised on a stage set for a tragedy. You open the door a crack and peer outside. The world is unrecognizable. Dunes of dust have piled up against the side of your house, some 4 or 5 feet high. Your wagon is buried up to its axles. The road has disappeared completely, replaced by a rippled landscape of dirt. The air is still thick with dust, but at least you can see now. At least you can breathe without feeling like you're drowning. Your neighbour's house is barely visible through the haze. You wonder if they survived. You wonder if you should check on them, but your legs feel like rubber and your lungs hurt with every breath, so you close the door and lean against it, sliding down to sit on the floor. Your wife is trying to clean the children's faces with a damp cloth, but she's just smearing the dust around. There's too much of it. It's in their hair, their ears, the creases of their skin. It's everywhere. It's in the food in your cupboard, in the water in your pitcher, in the folds of the blankets on the bed. Tomorrow you'll spend hours trying to clean it, shoveling it out like snow, and you'll barely make a dent. But right now, in this moment, you're just grateful to be alive. Grateful that your family is intact. Grateful that the darkness has passed, even though you know deep in your bones that this isn't over. This is just one storm. There will be more. There are always more. You pull your children close, one under each arm, and your wife leans against you, and the 4 of you sit there on the floor of your dust-filled home, coughing occasionally, too tired to even cry, while outside the wind whispers its promises of future storms to come. Spoiler alert, it keeps its promises. The next morning you wake up coughing, not the polite clear-your-throat kind of cough. The desperate, body-convulsing, God, is this what dying feels like kind of cough. Your lungs feel like they've been coated in cement that's slowly hardening. Which, biochemically speaking, isn't far from the truth. Let's talk about what happened to your respiratory system yesterday, because it's about to get a lot worse before it gets better. If it gets better. You spent roughly 10 hours breathing air that contained particulate matter in concentrations that would make modern air quality monitors explode in confusion. We're talking about particles in two main categories: PM10, particles less than 10 micrometers, and PM2.5, particles less than 2.5 micrometers. For context, a human hair is about 70 micrometers wide. These particles are tiny enough to bypass every defense mechanism your body has. Your nose hairs? Useless. They filter out large particles, the chunky bits, but these dust particles are like the Navy SEALs of respiratory threats. Small, elite, and designed to penetrate deep into enemy territory. Your territory. When you breathe, air normally travels through your nose or mouth, down your trachea, through your bronchi, and into your lungs, where tiny air sacs called alveoli exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. It's a beautiful system, really. Elegant. Efficient. Unless you're breathing in Oklahoma topsoil at 60 miles per hour, in which case it becomes a horror show. The larger PM10 particles get lodged in your upper respiratory tract, your nose, throat, and larger airways. That's why your throat feels like you've been gargling sand, because you basically have been. These particles irritate the mucous membranes, causing inflammation, coughing, and that delightful sensation of having swallowed broken glass. But it's the PM2.5 particles you should really be worried about. These microscopic assassins travel all the way down into your alveoli, those delicate little air sacs where gas exchange happens. Once there, they settle in like unwanted house guests who never leave. Your body tries to remove them. That's what the coughing is about. But they're too small and too numerous. Many of them will stay in your lungs for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be. Here's a fun fact that's not fun at all. During yesterday's storm, you inhaled approximately 6.62 grams of dust over those 10 hours. That's about 1.5 teaspoons. Doesn't sound like much until you remember that it's in your lungs, coating the tissues that are supposed to be transferring oxygen into your bloodstream. Your body's response to this invasion is inflammation. Your immune system, bless its confused little heart, sees all this foreign material and goes into panic mode. White blood cells flood the area. Fluid accumulates. Your airways swell. The technical term is acute inflammatory response. The practical term is you feel like you're breathing through a cocktail straw filled with pudding. But wait, it gets better. About 60% of that dust you inhaled is silica, crystalline silica, the same stuff that causes silicosis in miners and construction workers. It's incredibly damaging to lung tissue because it's both physically abrasive and chemically reactive. Over time, chronic exposure causes scarring of the lung tissue, a condition called pulmonary fibrosis, which is exactly as pleasant as it sounds. Your body literally can't break down silica particles. They just sit there in your lungs, causing chronic inflammation, increasing your risk of lung cancer, autoimmune diseases, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It's like your lungs are now part storage unit for geological samples and part biological disaster zone. You stumble out of bed, each breath a conscious effort. Your chest feels tight, like someone's sitting on it, like an elephant made of anxiety and regret, but with more dust. Your wife is already up, trying to make breakfast, but everything is still coated in fine silt. The bread has a gritty texture. The coffee tastes like dirt, which makes sense because it literally contains dirt. Your children are still asleep, or at least lying down. Your daughter's breathing sounds wheezy, a high-pitched whistle on the exhale that makes your heart clench. Your son's cough has developed a wet, productive quality that worries you even more. You've heard that cough before, in neighbours, in friends. Sometimes they got better, sometimes they didn't. You step outside to assess the damage and immediately wish you hadn't. The landscape has been transformed. What was a flat prairie yesterday is now a series of undulating dunes. Dust has piled up against your house, in drifts 4 to 5 feet high. Your chicken coop is completely buried. Your well, your precious water source, is choked with mud and dust. But it's the air that really gets you. Even now, Hours after the storm, the air is thick with suspended particles. It looks like fog, that hazy brown fog that burns your eyes and makes every breath an adventure in regret. Visibility is maybe a quarter mile. The sun is trying to break through, but it's weak, filtered, giving everything a sepia tone like an old photograph of hell. You're not alone. Across the panhandle from Texas to Kansas to Oklahoma, hundreds of thousands of people are waking up to the same nightmare. Some aren't waking up at all. The exact death toll from Black Sunday will never be known, but between dust pneumonia, dust suffocation, and accidents caused by zero visibility, dozens will die directly from the storm. Hundreds more will die in the following weeks as infections set in. And this is just one storm, just one day. You've had 14 dust storms already this month. 14 times your lungs have been assaulted with particulate matter. And it's only mid-April. The dust storm season is just getting started. Here's what you don't know yet, what won't be understood for decades. Exposure to this level of particulate air pollution is shaving months, maybe years off your life. Studies done much later will show that people who were in utero or in early childhood during the Dust Bowl had their life expectancy reduced by an average of 0.85 months. For adults with chronic exposure, the numbers are worse. You're literally breathing in your own early death, one particle at a time. Like the world's slowest, grittiest, most democratic form of execution. But hey, at least the sun came out again. Silver linings, right? By noon, you've heard the rumours. Mrs. Henderson, 3 farms over, died during the night. 72 years old, lungs already weak from decades of prairie life. The storm was too much. They found her this morning sitting in her chair, a cloth still pressed to her face, eyes closed like she'd just drifted off, except she hadn't. The Kowalski boy, maybe 13, is in bad shape. Fever of 104, rattling coughs that shake the walls. The doctor, if you can call him that, he's actually a veterinarian who took 2 correspondence courses in human medicine because the real doctor left last year, says it's dust pneumonia. Says the boy's lungs are filling with fluid as his body tries to flush out the particles. Says it could go either way. You think about your own children and feel your breakfast, gritty as it was, trying to make a reappearance. 3 people in the county died yesterday from dust suffocation. Just stopped breathing during the storm. Their lungs couldn't process air that was more dirt than oxygen. One of them was found outside, having tried to make it home. He was 15 feet from his front door. 15 feet! His wife said she heard him pounding on the siding, heard him calling her name, but by the time she made it to the door through the darkness inside the house, the pounding had stopped. They found him face down, his hands still outstretched toward the door. His mouth and nose were packed with dust. His stomach, when they cut him open to try to understand what happened, was stuffed with fine sand. Like he'd been trying to eat his way home through the storm. That image will stay with you. It'll wake you up at 3 a.m. for years to come. Here's your historical fact of the night. During the Dust Bowl years, dust pneumonia rates in affected counties increased by 50 to 100% compared to pre-drought years. And that's just counting the cases that were actually diagnosed and recorded. In rural areas, where doctors were scarce and death was common enough not to always warrant investigation, the real numbers were likely much higher. The symptoms are brutal. It starts with a dry cough, the kind that won't quit. Then comes the fever, spiking high as your body fights the foreign invasion. Your chest starts to hurt, a deep ache that gets worse with every breath. Breathing becomes difficult, then laboured, then desperate. Fluid fills your lungs as inflammation runs rampant. You're essentially drowning slowly in your own body's defensive response. The treatment options in 1935? Pretty much prayer and hope. Doctors recommend bed rest, fluids, and keeping the air as clean as possible, which is like treating a drowning victim by suggesting they try not to get so wet. In severe cases, they might try bloodletting or mustard plasters or other medieval-sounding remedies that do approximately nothing. There are no antibiotics yet. Penicillin won't become widely available until the 1940s. If you develop a secondary bacterial infection, which many dust pneumonia patients do, you're pretty much screwed. Your body has to fight it off on its own. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You spend the afternoon checking on neighbours, partly out of genuine concern, Partly because you need to know how bad things are, partly because sitting in your dust-filled house with your wheezing children is driving you slowly insane. The Johnsons lost all their livestock, 7 cows and a horse, suffocated in the barn where they'd taken shelter. When Mr. Johnson cut them open to see what happened, their stomachs were full of fine sand. The animals had been breathing so hard in the dust-choked air that they'd inhaled dirt until their digestive systems backed up, and they died from internal blockage. It's the kind of death that makes you grateful humans usually die faster. The Ramirez family is considering leaving, just packing up and heading to California like so many others. They have family there, or so they claim. You've heard the stories, though, about the Okies showing up in California only to find poverty, discrimination, and labor camps that make the Dust Bowl look appealing. But at least in California they have air you can breathe without chewing. You pass by the church on your way back home. There's a line of people outside waiting to see the priest, not for confession but for aid. The Red Cross has set up a relief station, distributing masks, medicine, food. You join the line, pride be damned. Pride doesn't feed your children or clear the dust from their lungs. When you finally get to the front, a tired-looking woman with a Red Cross armband gives you 3 cloth masks, a bottle of something she calls lung tonic, which you're pretty sure is just sugar water and lies, and a pamphlet on surviving dust storms. The pamphlet is already coated in dust. The irony is not lost on you. The masks are simple things, just cloth tied around the face, but they're better than nothing, better than breathing straight dust. You give 2 to your children and keep 1 for yourself. Your wife insists she's fine, which is a lie, but you're too tired to argue. That night your son's cough gets worse, much worse. By midnight he's gasping between coughs, his small body convulsing with the effort. His fever is climbing. Your wife is crying silently, tears making clean tracks down her dust-covered cheeks. You sit up with him, holding him, trying to remember prayers you learned as a child. But the words won't come. All you can think is, this is my son. He is 7 years old. He likes to chase chickens and make up songs. He has his mother's eyes and my stubborn streak. He cannot die from breathing air, but he might. Because 1935 doesn't care about fairness or justice or the love of a father for his son. 1935 cares about topsoil and rainfall and the mistakes of a generation who thought they could plough up the prairies and nothing bad would happen. Around 3 a.m, the fever breaks. Your son falls into a restless sleep, his breathing still laboured but less desperate. You lean back against the wall, exhausted, covered in dust and sweat and fear. Your wife takes your hand. "We can't stay," she whispers. "Not through another season of this." You don't answer, because she's right, and because leaving means giving up, admitting defeat, joining the masses of displaced families flooding west in search of a future that might not exist. But staying means watching your children cough themselves to death 1 particle at a time. Outside, the wind is picking up again. Just a breeze for now. But you've learned to read the signs, to feel the electricity in the air, to watch the birds. There's another storm coming. There's always another storm coming. Dawn breaks dusty and dim. You've learned not to expect clean sunrises anymore. The sun is a pale disk filtered through suspended particulate matter, giving the world that sepia-toned, end-of-days aesthetic that's becoming depressingly familiar. Like Instagram filters, but for environmental catastrophe. You're sitting at your table trying to do math that doesn't want to add up. Not arithmetic exactly, more like the terrible calculus of survival. How much food do you have left? 3 weeks' worth? Maybe less if you're generous with portions. How much water? Your well is choked with dust. It'll take days to clean out, assuming it's even possible. Meanwhile, you're rationing water like it's liquid gold, which in a drought that's lasted 5 years it basically is. How much money? You count the coins in the jar under the floorboard. $17.35. Everything you have in the world. The bank accounts are gone, lost in the depression. The farm produces nothing. There are no jobs because there is no economy. You're one disaster away from zero, and yesterday you had the disaster. Here's what's happening across the Dust Bowl. Information that won't be fully compiled for years, but you can feel the truth of it in your bones. By 1935, 162 million acres have been damaged by wind erosion. That's 80% of the high plains. 10 million acres have lost 5 inches of topsoil. Another 13.5 million acres have lost 2.5 inches, averaging 480 tonnes per acre. Let that sink in. 480 tonnes of topsoil per acre just gone, blown away. That's not dirt, that's the future. That's food security, that's economic viability, that's your children's inheritance scattered across 3 states and settling in distant oceans. The economic devastation is staggering. By 1936, the Dust Bowl will be costing an estimated $25 million per day in lost productivity and damage. In 2024 dollars, that's roughly $570 million every single day. The Soil Conservation Service will estimate annual productivity losses at $400 million. 1930s dollars, remember. But those are big numbers, national numbers. They don't capture what it means when you're sitting in a dust-filled house with coughing children and $17 to your name. Your farm is worthless. Not exaggerating. Actually worthless. The bank won't give you a loan because there's nothing to loan against. You can't sell because there are no buyers. You can't grow anything because there's no topsoil. The cattle market has collapsed. Wheat prices are at historic lows. Even if you could grow wheat, which you can't, you couldn't sell it for enough to cover the cost of seed. You're trapped in an economic death spiral, which is like a regular spiral except it ends in foreclosure and starvation instead of just dizziness. Your neighbour, Tom Henderson, stopped by this morning. His wife died yesterday, you heard. But he needed to talk to someone or maybe just be seen by another human being. He told you the bank foreclosed on his farm. 5 generations his family worked that land, and now it belongs to some banker in Oklahoma City who's never seen a dust storm in his life. Where will you go? You asked. He just shrugged. California, I guess. Heard they need farm workers there. You didn't have the heart to tell him what you heard, that California has more migrant workers than jobs, that wages are depressed to the point of slavery, that the locals hate Okies, with a passion usually reserved for biblical plagues. Which is ironic, because the Okies are fleeing a biblical plague of sorts. He left around noon, walking down the road with everything he owns in a sack over his shoulder. You watched him disappear into the dusty haze and wondered if you'd ever see him again. Probably not. The Dust Bowl is swallowing families whole, erasing them from the landscape as thoroughly as it erased the topsoil. The arithmetic continues in your head, relentless. 2.5 million people will eventually leave the Dust Bowl states. Nearly 500,000 will be left completely homeless. Over 350,000 will end up in California, living in tent cities and shanty towns, competing for jobs that pay pennies and dignity that cost everything. Your own family is part of a statistical trend you don't have a name for yet, rural depopulation. Some areas will see 40% population drops. Entire towns will simply cease to exist. Schools will close, churches will empty, post offices will shut down. It's like watching civilization run in reverse, watching the frontier unsettle itself. But the worst part, the part that keeps you up at night, isn't the economic numbers. It's the human cost that can't be quantified. It's the look in your daughter's eyes when she asked if you were poor now. It's the way your wife's hands shake when she measures out the flour. It's your son's cough, still wet and rattling. It's the Henderson boy, the one with dust pneumonia who died this afternoon, 13 years old. He wanted to be a pilot. He used to run through the fields pretending his arms were wings. Now he's a statistic, one of dozens in the county, hundreds in the region, uncounted thousands across the Dust Bowl. Malnutrition is killing almost as many as the dust. You can see it in the faces around town. Hollow cheeks, dull eyes, that grey pallor of people who aren't getting enough calories or nutrients. It's not starvation exactly. It's slower, more subtle. It's the kind of hunger that doesn't kill you this week, just weakens you enough that when the next dust storm comes, when the next disease sweeps through, you don't have the reserves to fight it off. And the mental toll? There's no statistic for that. No number for the hopelessness you feel when you wake up to another dust-filled morning. No metric for the shame of not being able to provide for your family despite working every day. No accounting for the weight of wondering if your children would be better off if you'd never been born, never brought them into this wasteland. Some men can't take it. You've heard 3 stories this month alone of farmers who just walked into their barns and didn't walk out, who left notes for their wives saying "I'm sorry" and nothing else, who decided that a world without hope wasn't a world worth living in. You understand those men. You understand them in a way that terrifies you. Your wife finds you sitting outside as the sun sets, that filtered dust sunset that paints the sky in shades of apocalypse. She sits beside you without speaking. After a while, she takes your hand. "We're going to be okay," she says. It's a lie. You both know it. But it's the kind of lie that marriages are built on. The kind that gets you through the night even when the morning looks impossible. You squeeze her hand. "Yeah," you say. "We are." Behind you, through the walls, you can hear your children sleeping. Your daughter's breathing is clear tonight. Your son's cough has eased. These small victories are all you have. Tomorrow you'll clean the well. Tomorrow you'll try to plant something. Tomorrow you'll figure out how to make $17 last long enough for rain to come, for things to change, for the impossible to become merely improbable. Tomorrow you'll do the arithmetic of survival again and hope the answer is different. But tonight, you just sit with your wife and watch the dust-filtered sunset and let yourself believe, just for a moment, that the numbers might still add up to something other than 0. You hear it before you feel it. An animal hum in the walls, a tinny crackle in the doorknob, a bite that jumps from your knuckle to the iron latch as if the house has grown teeth. The storm didn't just bring dust. It dragged a charge large enough to stitch blue sparks across fences and spook the birds into tumbling flight, and now every metal edge around you answers back with a mean little snap. Outside, that towering front blew in like a land-borne tidal wave, 2 miles high in places and racing 50 to 60 miles an hour, and it carried more than dirt. It brought a battery the size of the plains. Your lamp sputters and sulks because there isn't enough oxygen in the room to keep a steady flame, and even when you coax a wick to life, it gutters small and sour, as though the night itself is drinking the air. You try again anyway, because light means control, and control feels like breathing without grit grinding your lungs raw. Listen to the soft hiss of dust sifting down the window sash. It's a dry whisper that fills everything and apologizes for nothing. People will later say the storm made midday into midnight, and they won't be exaggerating because in some towns you couldn't see a lamp inches from your face or your own hand if you dared to lift it from the scarf you tied across your mouth. The wind arrived like a verdict and the temperature dropped like a trap door. 30 degrees gone in the time it takes to grab your child and fumble for a door jamb. One county over, they'll record a plunge from the mid-80s to the 50s in a couple hours, but the numbers don't capture what your skin knows. Heat is a friend who stepped out back and never came home. Your breath fogs in the dim, and the static snaps at your earlobe when you brush the stovepipe, turning the ordinary into a minefield of low, mean lightning. Cars stall in the road because spark and sand hate each other, and the storm loves both. More than one engine dies as the charge climbs, and someone a mile down the road will try to walk the last stretch to the porch and wander off the path because inertia prefers suffering to mercy. The wind pushes like a hard hand between your shoulder blades, even here inside, flexing the rafters and stroking your hair flat with a pressure that feels personal. It's not just the charge and the cold, it's the density, the way the dust soaks sound, makes the world feel padded and far away until every voice drops 2 rooms back. You shout your child's name and it arrives to you muffled and slow, and you wonder if this is how people hear their final prayers in a church with no windows and a sky made of ground. The first cloth you tie is too thin, and your mouth tastes like you chewed a clay brick and washed it down with a spoon of ashes. You swap rags for something thicker and dampen them, and the fabric chills your cheeks while the dust clings anyway, fine enough to pass where breath can pass and faithful enough to follow you into every corner of the room. The static climbs again. You can feel it tighten the skin on your forearms, hair standing at attention like the storm is about to swear you in and make you citizen of a country that will never recognize you. Someone says a cow chip burst into fire from a spark 2 towns over, and you don't know if it's true, only that the rumour fits, because everything tonight behaves like a fuse. A man will later swear he watched blue tongues lick between fence posts and prayer, and you have no trouble believing him, because you've just seen a blue flare leap from kettle rim to latch, and you almost called it by a name. Breathe slower, you think. Less air, less dust, less trouble, and your lungs still rebel with a cough that tastes like iron and old pennies. Fine particles find their way to the deepest folds of lung where gas exchange happens, lodging like mean seeds, and your body answers the invasion with heat and fluid and that awful, wet bark you will hear in the night even when it's quiet. In some homes the lamps won't hold flame at all, and people sit in total, insulting black for 40 minutes that feel holy and then damned, followed by hours more of darkness that pretends to be dusk. This is how static turns domestic, not as spectacle, but as 1,000 small betrayals, knobs that bite, engines that quit, lamps that refuse light, wool blankets that crackle like bad jokes in a church pew. You whisper to your children to keep their hands in their laps and their feet on the rug, because even now you're counting risks like coins in a jar with a hole in the bottom. You think about heat, about the easy weight of it on a normal Sunday, and how warmth kept the wind slow, and you realise you've already begun to measure safety not by shelter, but by temperature and charge. The storm has a logic, ugly and firm. It arrives with a cold front, drops the mercury by handfuls, wraps the room in grit, and teaches every piece of metal in your life to talk back. You tuck the damp cloth over the smallest face again, and press your thumb against a tiny pulse, and tell yourself the rhythm counts, because counting is one of the last simple things left to do. Then the wind heaves once, as if shouldering the house aside to check your work, and all at once the sparks quiet a little. The air loosens by a breath, and you feel instead the steady sprinkling of dust coming through every seam, patient as time. It isn't mercy, it's just phase 2. When the sky drops to the floor, your world shrinks to a hand on a wall and a prayer that the wall belongs to your house. People talk about zero visibility like it's a number, but tonight it is a posture. Knees and palms and a face wrapped in wet cloth, moving by inches toward a door frame you cannot prove exists. The government men will mark down 0 and then 10 feet and 50 feet, like it's a polite lab experiment. Yet here in this corridor between the pantry and the table, the distance is measured in splinters and fear. One family crawled 3/4 of a mile and found an adobe ruin stuffed with neighbours, and stayed there 4 hours in a darkness that felt like a room inside a room, struggling for breath as if the storm had pressed a thumb down on every chest. Another woman's car went silent in the charge, and she set out walking home and stepped off the road into ink, saved only when her husband drove back and forth dragging the headlights like nets through the murk until she found light and stumbled. You think about the fence line outside, the way a post under your palm can be a compass when the world has no up, and you bless boards and barbs like they were saints. The trick is to lower the profile and trade distance for certainty. You crawl not because you're weak, but because the storm hates tall things more than it hates the stubborn. In a normal night you could count the cottonwood silhouettes to mark the yard, but tonight you could be 5 feet from the trunk and never meet it, wandering like a slow, obedient ghost. The birds knew first. They went ragged ahead of the wall, then vanished into the swirl, weaker wings bullied by a wind that doesn't negotiate. You'd laugh at the thought that geese could be helpless. Geese are small lawyers in feathers, but you saw them dive and dip without flying, and you learned a new respect for gravity's enemies. Inside, navigation is a smaller art. Stairs that betray memory and chair legs that you map with your shins. A kitchen you could walk blind any other night now turned into a test with moving parts. The dust blurs edges and the taste of earth erases appetite. You're a mouth and a nose and a set of hands, and they are all busy failing and trying. Outside, someone will miss a porch by an arm's length and lie down in the lee of a dune that did not exist yesterday, and the storm will pass as it always passes, and the world will still exist on both sides of the error. That is how the statistics are made. 12 lost near home, a handful who stop breathing 15 steps from safety, because a hand cannot find wood in a room full of wind. Those records will say suffocation, and you'll think how precise the word is, and how little it helps the ones who stood inside and listened to a knocking that lost its rhythm. You learn tricks you wish you'd never need. Ropes tied from doorknob to barn if you must go, a wet sheet hung where the door leaks worst, flour sacks pressed in window cracks because flour knows how to fill a space and the storm respects what's stubborn and close woven. And still, dust makes liars of all your preparations, climbing under, over, through, as if it studied you for years and drew a clever map. The thing to remember is simple and cruel. Distance is the enemy. Even the small kind, so you bring the bucket near the door and the children nearer the wall, and you keep your voice close enough to touch. If you must move, you move along reliable edges, and when you cannot find one, you make one with your shoulder and your will and the memory of where the table has always been. When the wind slacks to a heavy growl and the blackness softens to brown, you tell yourself you can stand and walk, but your body remembers that the ground felt safer than the guess. PBS +1. Later, the logs will read 0 visibility 12 minutes in Amarillo, and across the region they will note 40 minutes of total darkness, followed by 3 hours of partial darkness as if life belongs in a tidy ledger. You'll know that the numbers are right and still too small, because 12 minutes is a lifetime if you spend it blind with a lungful of grit and a child's breath ticking like a weak clock. And you will keep your hand on the same piece of wood for longer than you thought possible because the wall is a promise that the world is still arranged in straight lines somewhere under all this soft, moving ruin. When you finally risk the door again, and the wind pushes it shut like a jealous thing, you accept for the first time that the house is not shelter. It is only a ship, and you are learning how to sail in a sea that wants to be land. You kneel, you breathe slow, you listen to the sift and sigh, and you wait for the tide to turn. By the time the blackness fades to a burned umber, the house looks dusted in grey like an old photograph of itself. You pull a drawer, and it slides gritty and wrong. You touch a plate and leave a clean moon where your fingers were. You put a cup to your lips and drink a little mud and try not to swear in front of the child who has stopped coughing for now. Dust doesn't stop at the door because doors are for people, and the storm was never a person. It is a process, a machine that strips and sifts and enters anywhere breath can go. People will later tell stories of stuffing rags under thresholds and hanging wet blankets and finding their bread full of silt anyway, remembering how it settled on hair and quilts and the inside of eyelids, with the quiet confidence of a long lease. If you had a filter, you could measure what you've swallowed, but you have a tongue and it knows enough. The well is choked, and the bucket comes up brown and sulking, a slurry that settles to a sullen dune in a pail while you stand over it and think about thirst. In the barn, what's left of it, someone's cow has lain down and stayed down, and a neighbour will cut an animal open and find stomach stuffed with fine sand like the worst parody of a winter feed. Fields are a bad joke. Dunes banked against a fence like snowdrifts that won't melt, and piles under the eaves 4 feet high as if the house had been huddling all night and needed proof. You tell yourself you'll shovel, and you do shovel, and the wind laughs low and steady and sifts the pile back into your boot prints as if to correct your grammar. The arithmetic is simple and mean. Dust in, food out, dust in, breath out, dust in, water gone. Then come the visitors with armbands, moving in that careful way of people who know their hands are too small, offering cloth masks and tonics and advice printed on paper the storm will borrow and file somewhere in the hedgerow. They have numbers too. Reports of deaths from dust pneumonia and suffocation, talk of a relief station in a town you can barely reach on a good day, and a voice that calls you sir, even when you look like a statue someone left out in a salt wind for a decade. They tell you to rest and drink and keep the house sealed, and you nod because you know this is a problem without a door, and you thank them because politeness is the last easy thing you can carry without dropping. After they leave, you sweep and cough and sweep again, and you think how this house has turned from shelter to riddle, from promise to hazard, until the place you sleep feels like a slow, patient trap that resets each night. You swear you will not let it do that to you, and you swear softly so the children do not hear. People will leave, more each week. 2.5 million by the end of it all, they'll say, and some will call them Okies, even when they aren't from there, and words will be just another grit in the teeth. Those who go trade dust for disdain, relief camps for relief, new hunger for old hunger, and still you will look west some mornings and think about a road you could follow until it stops being yours. You will also look at your children and count the rasp in the boy's breath, and the colour in the girl's face, and tell yourself to try one more planting, one more fix, one more week with the rags and the cracks and the bucket under the drip. Out in the yard, a chicken, the last of its name, scratches at a dune that used to be a path, and you love it for the habit of trying. You love yourself for the same thing, even if you won't say it aloud. The older neighbours, the ones with faces like maps, will say they've seen storms, that dust has always blown, and they're right in that way truth can be right and still too small. This one was worse, and not just in volume or length or reach. It was worse because it found you where you live and turned your home into an instrument. You'll remember the blue sparks between fence posts, and the way the door pressed back when you pulled, and how the lamp sulked, and the cup lied and the floor hissed, and you'll understand that a house is only as strong as the air that wants to live in it. By evening you'll have a trail of neat piles along the walls like small brown altars, and your back will have the stiff ache of someone who survived something and earned nothing but sunrise. You tuck the children in and press the cloth over the window cracks and tell the night that enough is enough, and the night answers like a banker, noted, not agreed. When the sky finally dims into an ordinary dark, not the fist of it you had at noon, you hear an owl where the church bell would be and take this for a kind of blessing. You sit by a lamp that obeys again now that the air will let it, and you watch the flame through grit-stung eyes and feel a mean little joy that the physics of small things sometimes prefer you. Tomorrow you will pull dust from pockets and spoons and throats and spend your strength on shoveling what the wind shoved, and it will be briefly funny in a way that does not require laughter. You say a prayer into the quiet, not to end the dust, but to spare a body or two, and to keep a pulse steady through the night. Then you sleep with your hand against a wall like a sailor who learned how to steer. You wake to the sound of your own breathing like a saw through damp wood. Shallow, noisy, every inhale catching on grit you didn't invite but now must carry. The storm left, and still it hasn't left. It lingers in you as a fine, faithful residue that turns every breath into a bargain your lungs negotiate badly. The dust that swallowed the noon and bullied the lamps is now the dust that coats your tongue, scratches your throat, and settles where air is supposed to exchange for life. People will call it dust pneumonia, lungs filled with fine particles that spark fever, chest pain, rattling coughs, and that slow, sinking panic that comes when oxygen becomes a rumour. In Kansas alone, officials will count at least 17 dead from dust pneumonia after the storm, and 3 more from outright suffocation, numbers that feel small beside the noise in your chest. You wet the cloth again because someone at the relief table told you to, and because it gives your hands a job they can finish, even if your lungs cannot. The rag cools your face and does nearly nothing, and you bless it anyway, because belief is a filter too, and tonight you will take mercy where you can find it. The worst of the wall passed yesterday, but the air still hangs brown in the morning light, a tired haze that shows you the storm kept a tithe. The birds know, some were found on the ground after the wall, small bodies stuffed and stilled by the same grit you're trying to forgive. That black boiling curtain, 2 miles high in stories and in some places 1,000 feet in eyewitness memory, did not just move over you, it moved into you. If you step outside, the world looks like it learned a new colour and refuses to stop using it. Dunes leaning against fences and under eaves as if the house had been sleeping and the wind tucked it in. Your body learned a new colour too, the sallow of too little oxygen and too much effort, the way your head aches when breath arrives late to its appointment. The government men will write of 0 visibility and 50 feet at intervals, and you will read those lines and imagine a doctor writing 0 air and 10 breath left, because that's how it felt when the blackness took your face. Children cough in small rooms, and mothers listen in the dark, counting each rattle like coins in a purse that won't refill, while the father sits up and pretends the lamp is enough to keep fear outside. The way the storm crawled under doors, it crawls under ribs, It is not done simply because the sky brightened and the floor stopped shaking. There are stories you will hear and try not to keep. The teen found 15 steps from his door, mouth and nose clogged by the thing he spent all day trying not to swallow. Another boy burns with a fever and his lungs fill because the body is trying to help and helping wrong, and the town's only doctor is 3 towns away and the vet is doing the visiting. Mercy travels slower than wind. This is a truth you do not need a radio to learn. You ladle weak broth that tastes like dust because everything tastes like dust, and you whisper the sort of prayer that doesn't ask for miracles, only for one more hour that feels ordinary. Outside, the quiet has a sound, the sift and the soft, which you could almost find soothing if you did not know what it's made of. Later, they will say Black Sunday displaced hundreds of thousands of tons of topsoil, and turned afternoon to night in towns from Beaver to Amarillo, and you will nod because you wore some of that tonnage in your chest. The storm gave the country a name, Dust Bowl, and there is something cruel about a name that fits so well you can hear it every time you cough. You are learning to sit between coughs, to think between wheezes, to live between storms, and it feels like moving into a smaller house inside your own body. The pamphlet says rest, water, fresh air, and you almost laugh, because the well pulls up mud, and the air still looks like an old photograph. You drink anyway, slow, stubborn, practicing the small art of survival that will carry you farther than advice. You strike the match and the flame flinches like a nervous animal, guttering small and sullen, because the air in here is not the sort of air that feeds. Yesterday's black noon taught the lamps humility. When the wall struck, some flames died outright for lack of oxygen, leaving families to sit in a darkness that cancelled even their hands. You carry that memory now, the way the house felt like a mouth with no breath, and that is why your fingers shake when the wick falters. This is what asphyxiation looks like in a kitchen. A lamp that will not bloom, a child who breathes shallow, a father who sits too straight so his lungs can find the top of him. The storm took heat too. You can still feel the ghost of that drop, the fast slide from a warm afternoon into a cold that bit through shirts like a reprimand. Someone said the wind travelled 60 miles an hour, and you believe them not because of the number, but because of the way the floor answered back, creaking like a tired ship while gravel hissed against the window. You remember the instant the sun disappeared, no twilight, just a coin snatched from your palm, and you think of it now when the lamp sulks, because flame knows when air is poor. In Amarillo they wrote, 0 visibility 12 minutes, and it reads like nothing, and still you can fit a lifetime of fright inside that number, a lifetime of trying to recall the path to the door by knee and knuckle. The cold rode in behind the wall, a cold front out of Canada that hitched power to grit and made a season change in an hour like it had somewhere else to be. Your body knew first and your mind followed, like a lamp deciding whether to be useful. You learn to ration flame like food, short burns to boil, short burns to see, quick rituals of light that mark the edges of a day you refuse to surrender. You crack the door and the outside stares back, a dull, shifting brown that still tastes like metal on your teeth, and you wonder whether the weather can be tired. The answer is no. You are the one who is tired, and the lamp knows it, and the house knows it, and the wind does not care either way. In another town, a car died in the charge and somebody walked into the night without the road, saved only by headlights combing the dust like hands through hair, and you don't need to be told to stay inside to know its wisdom. You sit with the lamp anyway because sometimes you need to see a small obedient star to remind your chest how to rise and fall. Breathe through cloth, the pamphlet said, and you do, even here at the table, because the storm taught you the house is porous and so are you. The old folks say they've known dust all their lives and you give them the nod they've earned. But your lamp remembers a blackness they did not, and your bones remember the sudden cold they did not, and knowledge has a cost. You put your palm to the glass chimney and feel a little heat, a little proof that this air still holds enough to feed a quiet, and you file that away under the heading Reasons. The wall is gone, but the lesson stays, and you will spend weeks practicing the simple arithmetic of oxygen and patience. It is not heroism, it is housekeeping for breath. You turn the kitchen into a clinic without saying the word because words add weight and tonight you are carrying enough. Boil water when the lamp allows. Dampen cloths. Rinse mouths. Wipe eyes. Sweep. Rest. Repeat. Tiny chores that stack up like sandbags against a river that won't admit it's a river. The children take turns on the chair nearest the draught because the air is a pointillist painting here. Less thick, more kind. Outside, the yard is folded wrong. Dunes smother the path and the coop looks half swallowed, which is a way of saying you will be hungry in a language nobody wants to translate. You seed the day with small foods, broth, bread, whatever the dust didn't steal, and you pretend taste is less important than swallowing. The relief station gave you a few masks and a bottle with a label promising lungs a second chance, and you took both because faith is light enough to carry. They spoke of symptoms with clean, practiced calm. Fever, chest pain, coughs that go low and wet. And behind the words was a number they didn't say. How far they can walk before their voices sound like yours. You think of the people who will not return to these kitchens, the ones counted in the ledger as dust pneumonia, and the ones the ledger misses because there aren't enough ledgers. You think, too, of how the storm entered every private act, sleeping, eating, praying, and turned them public by force, a shared ritual of grit and stubbornness. It is strange what becomes communal when the sky decides your schedule. At the table, you sort the vulnerable without speaking it aloud. Children first, elders near, the strong last, not because you are cruel, but because triage is just love with a list. You tuck the damp cloth under the boy's chin and hear the wheeze ease just enough to unclench your hands, and you count to 100 because numbers are handrails. When he sleeps, you trade places and let the cool seep into your mouth, and the first breath tastes like mud and the second like mercy. Someone knocks and you open to a neighbour with eyes that forgot sleep, and a story about a cow and a knife and a belly full of sand, and you nod because grief wants witnesses. You pour him a cup that pretends to be coffee and he pretends to believe you, and this is how people keep each other. Later, when the tales become tidy, they will say the storm changed everything, and you will say it changed breakfasts and bedtimes and the way you hold a wet rag. They will say migration, and you will hear your wife's whisper, asking if you can leave, and you will answer later with the list of what can be carried and what cannot. They will say soil conservation service and new practices, and you will nod because the land needs saving, but tonight you are saving breath. They will say one of the worst dust storms in American history, and you will agree, not because of the records, but because of the cup you lift and the cough you don't. In a year, perhaps, the fever of the land will break. Tonight, you are the cool cloth. When the house finally quiets, you leave the window cracked a finger to let the night decide if it will be gentle, and you sit with the lamp trimmed low and your ear tuned to a small chest rising. The storm took your measure, and you're still here. That's not triumph, but it is a line you will stand on when the next wall rolls. You fold the masks, rinse the bowl, set the broom where your hand will find it at first light. All the liturgy of living inside a place that tried to turn into weather. If there is a blessing in this, it is simple. You know what to do when breath thins, and you will do it again and again until the air remembers you. You touch the boy's hair, whisper sleep, and for a moment the room feels almost clean. You spend the morning deciding which parts of your life can fit into a grain sack, and the answer is mean and efficient. Documents, a skillet that won't warp, a folded quilt that remembers better seasons, 2 tin cups, and stories you hope weigh nothing. The well pulls up brown again, and you look at the water as if it might apologise. But it is only water that has learned a new habit, and you realise you have learned one too, counting the days since your boy's cough broke and the lamp stayed lit. The yard looks like the land sat down to rest and forgot to get back up. Dunes shouldered against the fence, the coop half swallowed, the path rewritten by a wind that does not sign its name. People say the Red Cross is still moving supplies along the counties and that headquarters set up in Kansas, and it helps to know someone is counting besides you, even if all the counting does is tell the same story slower. You say goodbye to the house without opening your mouth because words feel like dust. Once they're loose, you will be sweeping them for weeks. You tell yourself this is temporary, a road to clean air and work, because that is what roads are for in better years. and you fold that belief like a church shirt and set it near the top of the sack. The neighbours who swore they would never leave are already a day ahead. Their wagon wheels writing a shaky sentence down the lane that says later and maybe, and you can read it because you helped write it yesterday for someone else. 2.5 million will go by the time the decade catches its breath, they'll say, and it won't feel like a statistic when you're walking in it, only like a long low tide that forgot about the moon. They will call you Oki even if you are not from there, because names blow farther than dust, and you will answer anyway because food sometimes comes attached to the wrong word. You set the last bucket by the door and close it softly, as if the house were a sleeping animal, and you promise to come back when the sky remembers how to be blue without conditions. The road looks like a decision someone else made, straight until it bends and then straight again, and you step into it with your wife, your children, and a sack that has begun to feel like a question. Route 66 is a rumour made real beneath your feet and wheels, a spine of packed dirt and patched tar that runs like hope toward the places where produce needs hands and hands need wages. You pass a line of cars hood up like open mouths because engines hate grit and lightning both, and a man tells you yesterday the charge jumped from his fender to his fingers as if judgment travelled by wire. The birds do not follow you, but they did earlier, rushing ahead of the wall like bad news on fast feet, and you remember how they disappeared into the black and came out as silence. You walk anyway because standing still feels like agreeing with yesterday, and you have decided not to. On the shoulder you learn new math. 4 mouths, 3 cups, 2 blankets, 1 wind that knows all your names. Noon turns to evening without ceremony, because distance is a trickster. And the children count fence posts until fence turns to nothing, because some counties ran out of reasons to divide. You hear that in Liberal, the relief men kept a ledger of dust, pneumonia and suffocation, 17 and 3 in Kansas after the storm, and it lands in you like a pin on a map that proves fear had an office and a date stamp. A car slows and offers a ride for a few miles, and you climb in with care because Charity sits awkward in a lap and you thank them for the dust-free minutes as if they were coins. By the next town you trade a skillet for bread and a promise of work that tastes like yesterday's coffee. Useful, thin and warm for a while. Night is not the enemy the wall was, but it has its own ideas, and you arrange sleep under a trestle with other families who know how to be quiet in groups. In a whisper someone says California, the mother road, fruit so heavy it bruises itself on the branch, and the children breathe a little deeper, as if the lung could believe on credit. Then a woman says the blockade in Los Angeles once turned people back, and wages there bend like saplings when too many hands reach at once, and you learn that hope also requires fine print. The map in your head redraws itself, not a straight line to salvation, but a braided track of labour camps, day work, and towns where your name rides behind your accent like a squeaky wheel. You sleep with one hand on the sack and one on your son's shoulder, because handrails come in different shapes now, and most of them breathe. Morning is a cough, then a swallow, then a crust that crackles right, and it is amazing how quickly a body redefines feast. A truck rolls past with crates and the word peaches printed on the side like a hymn, and for a second you believe in vowels again, round and full and forgiving. A man in a hat the colour of old straw says there's picking a few miles ahead, and the road lifts its eyebrows and pretends it didn't hear your stomach answer first. You walk, and the wind is only a breeze, and the sky only dusty instead of guilty, and it feels like a truce you did not sign but will honour as long as it holds. Somewhere behind you, the house listens to its own quiet, and the dust settles into its corners like a tenant that pays in silt, and you promise the roof you will send for it when roofs can travel. California is not a place so much as a test printed in a font you don't recognise, and the first question is always the same. Who are you when everyone needs the same job? They will call you names that begin with O, even if your letters come from somewhere else, and you will answer to them because answering sometimes unlocks a day's wage and a night's rest. A camp outside town sprouts canvas and tin like a crop that germinates on grit, and your children learn the geography of tent rows and water pumps, and how to share a laugh with strangers who swallow the same dust. The sheriff counts how long you've been still, and the foreman counts how fast you pick, and both of them make a face when the numbers aren't pretty, and you make a better face because that is how faces work when they are paid. Some nights the wind comes soft from the ocean, and you remember that air can be sweet without conditions, and you forgive the world for an hour. Then come the lean runs when fruit is done and the fields go to stubble and rumour, and the road asks for your feet again without saying please. You hear a story of a camp where they sing and keep the fees honest, and you go there because songs are a kind of currency you still trust. Along the ditch you meet a man who went west twice and back once because the math worked better at home, with nothing than here with less than nothing, and you nod because subtraction has many dialects. Back in the plains, they say, the government sewed shelter belts and papers were signed to teach the ground to behave, and you listen as if policy were a letter from a cousin saying rain, sent third class and opened by everyone on the way. You sleep that night with the idea that leaving and returning are not enemies, only different verbs for the same stubborn noun. In the morning the foreman waves his clipboard and your hands relearn the rhythm of interruption, pick, breathe, cough, swallow, and you put a little money between today and tomorrow like a wedge that keeps the door from closing. Your wife counts jars and miles and days until the dust quits tasting like a question, and her ledger is the only one you trust entirely. When someone asks where you're from, you say a place where noon once turned into midnight and the fence shocked back, and they nod because everyone has their version of a day that changed its mind. You're not a story about escape or defeat. You're a person walking, and that is a kind of grammar the land still understands. When the sun goes down over a row of trees that remember water, you hold your boy's hand and say the quiet part out loud. We keep moving until the air remembers us. A few weeks after the Great Black Noon, the dust reached the capital the way news sometimes does, by arriving in the room before anyone speaks, and men in suits looked out at a brown sky and decided bills should move as fast as storms. They wrote the Soil Conservation Act into the calendar and gave the new Soil Conservation Service a name that sounded like a promise and a job that sounded like a prayer with shovels. You did not hear the speeches, only the farm agent's knock and a pamphlet that smelled like ink and hope, and you let him at your table because advice sometimes needs coffee to work. He pointed at your field the way a doctor points at a chest x-ray and said words like contour and strip and cover, and you nodded as if agreement were a seed. It felt odd to learn your land the way a schoolboy learns his letters, but the wall had already taught you what you didn't know could take your roof. They spoke of grass with roots like knotted rope, and how buffalo grass and blue grama held the prairie together before ploughs traded depth for yield, and you felt both shame and relief that the cure might look like the past. Shelter belts, lines of trees that break the wind's bad habits, rose on maps first and then in fields, and you watched saplings stand like thin soldiers practicing for a war you hoped they would win by standing. The agent said soil is a living thing, and you believed him because you had watched it move, and because living things can be coaxed into better behaviour with the right company. He said there were payments to retire the worst acres, land too tired to grow anything but regret, and you imagined a field allowed to be quiet for a season long enough to remember its native tongue. You signed where he pointed, and the pen felt heavier than it should, as if paper could carry not just policy but apology. Some neighbours called it government meddling until the next wall turned their noon into judgment again, and then they called it common sense and asked for extra pamphlets to give the cousins. In town, fences that used to divide neighbours from neighbours became lines that divided practices, old habits on one side, new on the other, and you watched which dunes formed where and learned faster than you would have liked. The schoolteacher drew a tree on the blackboard and wrote shelter belt beneath it like vocabulary, and the children took the word home like a spelling word you practice until it becomes your own. A pastor thanked the new rose in his Sunday talk without saying the agency's name, which is one way faith and policy hold hands without making anyone uncomfortable. And you stood by the saplings at dusk and listened to a small wind get confused for the first time in years, and called that confusion a beginning. The agent walked your fields and showed you how to plant along the curves the land already owned, and it felt like forgiveness to stop drawing straight lines where none belonged. He taught you to leave stubble standing, armour for the topsoil that had been going missing like small coins from a dresser, and you liked how the field looked less shaved and more bearded, a face allowed to be itself. Strip cropping put alternating bands of crop and cover where the wind would have to change its stride, and you imagined the storm stumbling, and it made you smile in a way that did not feel unkind. You learned to disc shallow and plough less, the way a doctor might tell a runner to breathe easier and longer, and the field answered by staying put even when afternoon frowned. It was not a miracle, but it was measurable, and measurable things keep men from arguing longer than miracles do. You retired the worst acres, the ones that had turned to drift factory more than field, and let grass come back like an old song that never really left the throat of the place. It took time, which is not news in a county where time once came all at once in the form of a wall, but this was a different kind of time, slow, stubborn, cumulative, and you learned to count it by the way dust stopped collecting in the hinges. The shelter belts grew a little, then a little more, and the children marked their height on the kitchen doorframe beside their own, and one spring a wind that used to snarl at your eaves turned aside as if it had somewhere less interesting to be. In meetings, men argued about yields and costs the way men will, and the agent brought charts that turned opinion into lines, and lines into decisions that held through next planting. The new habits made the old tractor sound different, less frantic, more sure, as if even iron could tell the difference between fighting and guiding. On Sundays you walked with your boy along the contour strips, and he ran his hand over wheat that hadn't blown away, and you told him the story of a day when noon turned to midnight and a fence bit back, and he made the right face. He picked up a handful of soil and it sifted back like it wanted to stay where it came from, and you felt gratitude that fit inside your ribs without crowding your breath. A neighbour who'd gone west came back thin and wiser and asked where to sign, and you did not say "I told you." You said "welcome," because the land had taught you that triumph and drought both travel in circles. The shelter belt took a snow the next winter and held it like a mother holds a child, and the spring that followed tasted a little greener, and the coffee did too. You wrote a letter to a cousin 3 counties over describing a wind that lost an argument and a field that kept its name, and you underlined the parts that sounded like luck because they were also work. No one announces the moment recovery starts because it does not start at a moment. It starts like roots, quiet, sideways, underfoot, until one day a storm comes and the window stays clean where it used to go brown. You notice it first in the broom, which works again, and then in the well, which pulls up water that looks like water, and then in your wife's shoulders, which lower by a thumb's width when the wind picks up. In the county ledgers they write fewer words under dust pneumonia, fewer under suffocation, more under planting, and the balance looks like a scale rediscovering centre. Land values will take years to forgive what Erosion wrote in big letters, and some counties will never get all the way back, because scars are honest even when they are healed. People will leave anyway, and some will not return, and the map will be a little emptier in places that used to be crowded with names that fit on mailboxes, but the grass returns where the worst acres were allowed to nap, and the shelter belts stop 100 small arguments between sky and ground each week, and you call that a politics you can vote for with a spade. The agent brings a new flyer about rotating crops, and you fix him a sandwich because gratitude works better with ham, and you joke that the field finally respects you because you learned to respect it first. The church picnic is less gritty than last year, and the children laugh without coughing at the end, and someone brings a pie that tastes like it grew up under a different kind of sky. Black Sunday keeps its name in town talk, but now it is a lesson instead of a prophecy, and that is a demotion you would award any storm. On the way home you run your palm along the bark of a young elm, and it feels like a sentence you will finish next spring. In quiet moments you remember the wall, and the dark that cancelled hands, and you put those memories where you keep the good tools, nearby, useful, a reminder of what breaks if left outside. When the wind lifts late one afternoon and the field lies still like a well-behaved dog, you say thank you out loud to no one in particular and to everyone who signed the paper, and you don't mind that the word leaves your mouth without dust on it. You're not superstitious, but you do not brag, and that is its own kind of ritual, respectful and practical. You sit on the step and let the west bleed orange into a sky that is dusty but not guilty, and you tell your boy that roots move sideways and people move forward, and that both of those truths can hold in one life. When night comes, it is just night, and you put the broom away without irony. Years later, when the radio says wind advisory, Your chest answers in a language you learned the day the sky turned to ground, and you lay a damp cloth across memory the way you once did across your face. Doctors will use new words for old hurts, PM 2.5, components, long-term exposure, and they will say what you already felt in your ribs, that fine dust is not a guest who leaves when the door is shut. Studies will show that breathing too much air with too many small particles walks older people closer to the edge more quickly, and that it is not just the amount of dust but the kind that matters. Organic, nitrate, sulfate, soot, mineral dust, all the surnames of what rode the wall. The researchers will argue about curves and hazards and then agree on the part you care about, that less dust is better for living and more dust is better for funerals. A review will lay the evidence out like a quilt. Short-term spikes mean more visits, more dispatches, more hospital beds filled with lungs that sound like doors in need of oil, and long-term exposure means trouble that moves into the body and changes its mail. You will hear that dust storms do more than scratch and choke, that they carry pathogens and troubles invisible without microscopes, and you will think about the way a cough moved through a camp where tents touched and water bowed to dust with every pore. Somewhere a headline will talk about cardiovascular days going bad after dust days, and you will remember neighbours who lost more than breath after a week of storms and silence. A scientist will say the Dust Bowl raised infant deaths and pneumonia, and even brought measles round more fiercely in some places, and you will feel the old wall walk through your kitchen one more time, smaller now but still wearing the same coat. You will sit down, breathe slow on purpose, and the breath will arrive, which is a small daily miracle you never stopped noticing. Then you will go sweep the porch for the pleasure of gathering ordinary dirt that belongs to your yard and not to 6 counties. Startling numbers travel with the stories. Millions left, 500,000 homeless, hundreds of thousands in California, and they won't feel like numbers in your mouth, only like faces that grew thinner and wiser, and sometimes angry from being named wrong. The doctor may mention that those born during the dirty years carry a small, measurable subtraction in their years, a month less on average if the womb shared too much of the grit, and you will think of your children and all the cloths you rinsed and the jars you boiled. You will not know what portion of any of it belongs to your house, your road, your decisions, and you will forgive yourself for using the word luck and the word grace on the same day. You will keep water by the bed on windy nights, because habit is a kind of medicine, and your wife will still tell you to sleep when you listen too long to a forecast that cannot change what you already fixed in the field. Morning will come anyway, as it always did, even the morning after black noon. The children who learned to count shelter belt rings and contour strips grew up with a kind of double vision, seeing both the storm that was and the field that stayed put, and they carried that into their work the way some men carry a pocket knife. Some moved to cities because the counties lost people like Topsoil and took decades to put them back, and the maps of land value and population kept the old scars legible long after the last big wall lost its teeth. Economists will write about persistent loss, land that never fully forgave the 1930s and farms that might have been better off trading ploughs for pasture, and the math will be tidy in print and messy in the dirt. A careful paper will say the long-run costs stuck like burrs in high erosion counties, that the per-acre value fell harder and recovered less, and you will nod because your neighbour's auction still sits loud in your ears. Another scholar will show how the early money for restoration seeded long-term reductions in erosion and more grass where grass belonged, and you will decide that patience is not a virtue so much as a tool. There will be arguments over whether to plant this or graze that, and the better arguments will start with the wind and the water instead of the price sheet, and that alone will make you feel you lived to pass on something besides a recipe for suffering. The children will say droughts are coming again, different but familiar, and they will speak of warming oceans and teleconnections that fling heat around the hemisphere, and you will admit those words do not sit easy on your tongue but respect the warning anyway. Someone will say the old drought sent heat to Europe and beyond by way of a pattern that wrapped the world, and the idea will feel both grand and cruel, like learning your grief had a passport. You will ask what a small county can do about that, and they will answer with the same syllables you learned from the agent, Cover, contour, conserve, and add a few about fuel and smoke you didn't need then, but might now. You will be grateful that rows of trees still confuse the wind, and that local decisions still matter in a world where storms send postcards across oceans. At a reunion, someone will stand up and say the name Black Sunday, and the room will go quiet because some names are still doors to a place everyone remembers, even if they arrived there by different roads. The grandchildren will ask if it was really dark at noon, and you will say darker than that, darker than a church cellar with the lamp sulking, darker than a story without a punchline, and they will make the right face. Then you will walk them to the shelter belt and show them how to put their backs to the wind and their eyes to the field, and watch the trees do quiet work, and that will be the day's lesson. After cake, you will tell them about a law that learned to carry a shovel and a farmer who learned to plant to the curve instead of the ruler, and they will laugh because it sounds like you making fun of yourself, which you are. On the drive home, they will fall asleep to the sound of tyres on a road that exists because someone once decided to hold the ground in place, and you will let the engine idle a minute longer just to listen. If a wall came again, not the same but cousin close, what would you do, and how soon would you do it? You would stuff rags and damp cloths and keep flame short and quiet, because some answers do not expire, and you would keep children near the floor and hands on wood and names in your mouth. You would tie a rope to the door for anyone who had to go out, and you would keep the bucket by the hinge and the radio on, and none of that would feel like panic because practice is a kind of peace. After you would sweep like a prayer and plant like a plan and call the agent by whatever they call agents now. And you would not argue about contour because there are only so many interesting ways to lose a field. You would ask your representatives to remember that bills can move like storms when they need to, and that conservation is cheaper than foreclosure and kinder than eulogy. You would look up when the talk turns to dust in other places, Sahara on snow, sand in the lungs of cities far from deserts, brown skies in a dozen languages, and you would remember that dust has always been both local and global, personal and plural. You would read that long-term exposure raises risks in the quiet arithmetic of years, and that mixture matters as much as mass, and you would teach the children the twin arts of masks and maps. You would tell them that in utero the world is already practicing on them, and so you will practice back on the world with trees and covers and choices that do not make the air a foe, and you would admit that even now, in a century that writes its forecasts with satellites, storms still arrive with sudden dark, and the work remains what it was. Keep the ground at home, keep the breath in the chest, and keep each other. Then you would ask the question the wind asked you once. If honour is doing what helps when it is hardest, what would you choose? Leave for a promise, or stay for a plan? And you would listen to the answers like rain on a roof you saved.